2 o'clock, 98 degrees outside. Tom Sullivan with you on KFBK. Greg Fishman just came in. He had a six-pack of Slice, ice-cold Slice, brought it over to the roofers over there, and they appreciate it. It is hot out there, and they're out there working. He says it must be 15 degrees hotter over by that machine. Well, speaking of hot, number one movie over the weekend, The Rising Sun, $15 million at the box office. Nobody even close. Came in second was the In the Line of Fire by the Clint Eastwood movie. It only had $8 million at the box office, so almost double was the interest in Rising Sun, the Michael Crichton book. By the way, I got a copy of Rising Sun and haven't read it yet from a friend of mine who's a CPA here in Sacramento. But I plan on it because I understand that the book is, shall we say, much more aggressive. The movie is much more toned down than the book. So I want to see the book, read the book, see the movie, all that sort of stuff in that order. But joining me today to discuss all of this about Japan and the Rising Sun, it doesn't have the in front of it apparently, is Douglas Lip of G. Douglas Lip and Associates. Excuse me. Welcome to KFBK.
Thank you.
Now you are, you're some of the material that you sent me here is about the Japanese and some of the questions you've been asked about it and so forth. Let me get this set up first by giving me a background about the G. Douglas Lip and Associates and what you do. Set your credentials, and then we'll wander into the movie from there.
Okay. I work with Japanese and American corporations to help them manage each other better, specifically American corporations going to Japan that have difficulty breaking into that market. Likewise, Japanese corporations coming here that have some difficulties managing the American workforce.
In doing so, in which way? You hold seminars, or you're a consultant?
Seminars,
or
right. I'll do consulting for both groups. I'll have one-on-one sessions with some Japanese executives that don't know how to work with Americans. Likewise, I'll have large seminars of 20 or 30 people that will spend anywhere from 8 to 30 hours studying how to work across cultures. And in many cases, I'll bring both cultures together in the same session to elicit from them their frustrations, and then to work out and develop some bridges for understanding.
How did you develop this expertise? What makes you an expert on this?
Well, I'm still studying as far if the Japanese side of me can come out a little bit, but yeah. I've started studying Japanese in 1970, and I've lived in Japan 2 separate times for 5 years, one as a graduate student in Japan, and once when I was with the Walt Disney Corporation. I spent a couple of years over there helping set up Tokyo Disneyland.
Oh, all right. That goes back a few years.
Yeah, it's 10-year anniversary this year, as a matter of fact.
I was going to say time flies, but it has been a while since they opened Tokyo Tokyo Disneyland.
Right.
And so you've been there, you've studied it, you speak the language.
Speak Japanese, read and write Japanese. I'm still studying it, but it's been a lot of fun.
And so this is a way for you to. How's business?
Business is great. I spent time in a U.S. company in Japan, being Walt Disney Productions Japan. I worked for a Japanese corporation in the United States, NEC Electronics, for almost 6 years. And there is a great need for better understanding across cultures, both not only Japanese and Americans, but other cultures as well.
Is there more demand for your service today than there was 5 years ago, or less?
There is more, absolutely.
So even though the economies have cooled off.
Right, and in fact, I think that the way that it's changing with the Japanese economy so sour right now is that the U.S.-based Japanese companies are under a lot of pressure from their corporate headquarters back in Japan to be self-sufficient, and so I get a lot more business from U.S.-based Japanese companies that are having a hard time managing the Americans.
So the what do they call it? The Toyota North America, that sort of thing.
Exactly, those kind of corporations. Okay. Likewise, with the yen situation in Japan, it's very advantageous for Americans to sell products in Japan right now, so a lot of people are interested in moving over there.
Sure. Get those cheap products sold to the Japanese with the dollar so low against the Japanese yen. You sent me some material, and one of them says 2 questions you're asked repeatedly. Did you think the book portrayed the U.S. and Japanese issues accurately, The Rising Sun? And did I think the book was racist? What's the answer?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. Looking at the bibliography that Michael Crichton has in Rising Sun, it's very extensive, and it relies a lot on some very well-read authors. However,
It is fiction, though.
It is fiction, and the thing to remember that this is strictly entertainment and it's fiction. And unfortunately, I think some of the negative sides of the book will outweigh any wonderful learning or positive learning people can get from the book or the movie.
Because people will get hung up on the racism involved?
I think they'll get hung up on some of the accusations and the whole fright issue of Japan Inc. is conspiring to take over the United States, whether it's the U.S. media, education, or business.
Well, there's certainly lots of accusations of that when it comes to Washington. That
Absolutely.
the Japanese were barely represented in Washington, and now they are, if not one of possibly the largest lobbying group, dollars-wise, in Washington, D.C.
No question. They have invested a lot of money in this country with lobbying efforts as well as with real estate.
So how can you argue that they aren't powerful in their willingness to take over the way that our government runs?
Oh, they're absolutely powerful. There's no question about that. The question about what they're doing in the book is extremely underhanded and backstabbing types of issues, whereas Americans, I think both cultures get involved in a lot of political intrigue across cultural boundaries, so it's not limited to the Japanese.
Speaking with Douglas Lip, who is the president of G. Douglas Lip and Associates, an expert, a consultant, if you will, in American-Japanese relations. One of the things that you point out in your letter to me says that the book portrays the Japanese as stop-at-nothing machines conspiring to take over the United States in various different parts. Now, I've had people on this show before. A woman who is an author, Asian, she's from China, I believe, originally, who writes about the fact that especially the Japanese, but the Asian mindset is one of business is treated very much like war, that they approach it like a war, and they lay out their flanks and their strategies and then move their armies forward. Do you agree or disagree with that?
Well, they're very competitive. If you look at some of the competition that occurs between Japanese companies in Japan, this is very evident. There's an electronics district in Japan called the Akihabara district, and the word is that if your product survives in that district in Japan, it will survive anywhere in the world because the competition is so keen there that it won't have any trouble taking over, whether it's in Bogota or New York. So they absolutely are very competitive, whether it's in business or in pursuing higher education.
If they're that competitive, is that why then, and again I'm referring back to some information that you've supplied to me about Rising Sun, fact or fiction, the fact that the book perpetuates a widely whispered about belief that the Japanese are sneaky and cannot be trusted?
Right. I think that in the book particularly they have a lot of issues that wove in Japanese business with also some practices of their organized crime group, which is known as the Yakuza. And I don't think that's made very clear, the distinction between the two. There's no question that in the Japanese society they have aggressive business people and they have an underworld mafia, so to speak, much like we have in the United States.
I was going to say, so what's the difference?
Right.
What's the difference? I mean, when you do business with people here in the United States, do you just openly trust everybody you do business with? I would say no.
Right. It's on a scale. If you had a scale, let's say 1 to 10, 1 being low trust and 10 being high trust, if I'm doing business with an American, after a certain amount of time, we both have this implicit common sense that says, okay, it's time to start working. We trust each other. And I think on a scale of 1 to 10, we're doing about an 8. We're feeling pretty good. And I ask my partner, and he says, okay, we're about an 8. If I take that same scale to Japan, my Japanese counterpart might say we're about a 1 on a trust level. There's not as much trust in the U.S. before we do business, whereas in Japan, if you don't have a relationship and trust first, there is no way you get to a task.
Let me go over that one more time, because that's also one of the things that, of course, I'm in a business where trust is the name of the game when you start dealing with somebody's money. But it always seems, though, as if that's not uncommon. That's the way we do business in the United States, is that we do business with people that we have relationships with. I give a speech have my ABCD speech, and one of those speeches is about being successful in sales. And that you cannot be successful in sales right here in Sacramento, California, unless you build relationships. So what's the difference?
Let me give an example of an American company that went to Japan that was having difficulty specifically in sales. In the U.S., they are a well-known personal care products corporation, and they are driven by sales and advertising and marketing. Their salespeople in the U.S. average 16 sales calls a day. 15 years ago, they took that same strategy to Japan and mandated of their Japanese sales staff that you will make 16 sales calls a day. The Japanese said, we can't do that because we've got to chat and talk more with our consumers. And what happened was their market share plummeted dramatically within months. The ultimate decision was to take those same Japanese salespeople and let them cut in half the number of sales calls to 8 so they could spend twice the time with each customer to maintain those relationships. So once again, it's a relative scale. What we think is high relationship in the U.S., in Japan would be viewed as almost no relationship at all.
MCI has a commercial running on television right now where they talk about cherry blossom time. Can you explain cherry blossom time, and is in fact that true?
Part of the issue with Japanese, it's a real interesting situation, all the different cultures and how those affect the Japanese, and part of that is the Buddhist culture. And the Buddhist culture is basically known as the culture of death, and this is what's used at Japanese funerals. And one of the things that it talks about is the passing of nature and how transient nature is. So when you've got the cherry blossoms in the spring, they're beautiful. One day, the next day, the rain will come and knock them down. Likewise, in the wintertime, you've got the first snows of winter, which are beautiful, but ultimately they will melt away with the springtime. So with each season, you've got this elation that comes at the beginning, but then this incredible sorrow that comes as it passes.
And that's what cherry blossom time is.
Precisely,
so in other
they're
words,
celebrating that.
They accuse people of just being there for the moment, the elation, the sale, and then they're gone.
Exactly.
Now I've visited Japan a couple of times, and I have related this story on the air before, and that is the issue of, I'll pick on Chrysler Corporation because they're doing so well now, but they weren't doing well before, and they personified the American trying to do business in Japan. And I thought, now listen, whoever's in charge of Chrysler-Japan must be the brother-in-law of somebody because he or she can't be too brilliant. When they send over automobiles, and I'm still doing news stories, Doug, as recently as in the last month, about how the major automakers are saying we're going to increase the shipment of vehicles with right-hand drive, the steering wheel on the right-hand side. Now, how many cars do you think Americans would buy here in the U.S. if the steering wheel was on the wrong side and the instruction book was in Japanese?
Not too many, I'm afraid.
And who's in charge? I mean, who's watching this? Here I am, a bumbling young guy just bouncing in Japan in 1984, and I went over. Curiosity got the best of me to see what American car dealerships looked like there, and that was what I saw.
That's exactly right, and I think that's one of the things that I was thinking about when I read the book Rising Sun, was that for the first time in many years, this last decade has shown that the American business is not on top of the heap like it was post-World War II, and I think that, quite frankly, we are not good students of other countries and other cultures, whereas the Japanese for years had spent many years studying foreign business styles and adapting what was good and throwing out what wasn't. We're in a position now where we're finally starting to realize that we can learn from other cultures and precisely alter not only the products that we're sending overseas, but the managerial style that we take should we decide to send expatriates overseas.
Talking with Doug Lipp, who is the president of I don't know why I want to say G. Douglas Lipp and Associates, Intercultural Executive Development. We'll come back and along with Doug Lipp, who's the president of his company that deals with Japanese-American relations, and Rising Sun is out, #1 at the box office this past week. Let's go right to the phones. And Ishura, let me hope I'm pronouncing that right. Ishura in Sacramento. Hi, you're on KFPK.
Yes. I listened to the speaker just now, and he termed that Buddhism is a culture of death, which is not true. They affirm life.
There are what?
They affirm life. It's not a culture of death, as he describes it.
All right, for the Buddhist, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you want to expand on that, Doug?
Thank you very much for bringing that up. It's used at the Japanese funerals, but it absolutely does celebrate life, as I mentioned, with the passing of the seasons, and there definitely is a celebration of the joy of life and new seasons. The food changes with each season, the clothing changes with each season, but it also focuses on the inherent transience of nature and the inherent sorrow that comes with snow that's melting or leaves that are falling, or that sort of thing. So thank you very much for bringing that up.
But it is cultural in the coming and goings of the seasons.
Indeed it is.
And so forth. The culture plays a big role between our two countries. It seems to me since 1970 or so, we have come a long ways towards understanding each other. Have we covered the gap 80%, 20%? Are we nowhere close to understanding each other, or what have we been doing for the last 20 years?
Some groups are a lot closer on that, Tom. I think that if you look, what gets the most press, of course, are corporations, because they get a lot of press with regards to bottom line. But a lot of organizations have been helping with intercultural understanding for years. Some of the nonprofit groups, such as the YMCAs, have had cultural exchange programs for years, and some of the foreign exchange programs through the colleges have been wildly successful in helping set up Americans and Japanese students and business people for success across cultures. It's just that in business, many times that doesn't come all the way through.
What do you think about the efforts we've made here in SACTO? Goes every, twice a year, I think it is?
SACTO traditionally has been going twice a year to help out, to explain what we're doing in this region of the world to the Japanese. Absolutely.
What about the governor's office? It seemed like it lost a little bit when the funding was changed.
Right. It backed up a little bit after they opened up the trade office in Tokyo, but they were wise enough to leave the associate director, the assistant director in charge in Japan, even though the American director had come home. So the presence is still there.
Jim Vaughn, who was the American director, is back, but the Japanese citizen who is working for the governor's office, so the relationships are still there.
They're continuing, yes.
All right. Mike in your car phone. Hello, Mike. You're on KF. Whoops, there we go. Hello, Mike.
Hi there.
You're on KFPK.
My comment was, after reading the book, what I found to be the most disturbing aspect was the implication that the Japanese were able to manipulate our political system on a local and national level, given the resources they have to devote to lobbying.
What do you think? Do you think the book portrayed reality when it came to the lobbying area?
I think it overemphasized that. That was part of the problem that I had with the fictional nature of the book, was that it looked at as if everything was a conspiracy on the part of the Japanese, and they had their finger in every pie available. No question that when you've got economic clout, you can wield influence over governments as well as corporations, but not to the extent that is portrayed in the book.
Hey, Mike, did you know you read the book, right?
Right.
Have you seen the movie?
No.
When you read the book, did you start finding yourself drifting into thinking this was having a hard time separating fiction from reality?
I don't think so. I just the aspect of the political influence was, and of course, Pebble Beach is an example where their political influence didn't go too far. They weren't able to convert Pebble Beach into a private club because the California Coastal Commission ruled against them.
Right.
Absolutely right.
And that was in the book. So if that was in the book, then they were mixing in a little bit of actual news with some fictional.
And that's the problem. Exactly. That's the problem, is because they had examples from Toshiba selling technology to the Soviets, and they had some bits and pieces of true information based on the bibliography that he read. Obviously, he has a lot of good information, but then he wove it into and out of fictional characters and situations.
Hard to differentiate.
Right.
Thanks, Mike, for your call.
Bye.
2:28 on KFPK. We'll take a break, and Douglas Lipp is here. He's a consultant on Japanese-American relations and the differences between them, and we'll talk about some of his insights into those relationships and your questions or your comments or your reactions to the movie or the book, Rising Sun, right after this break on KFPK. We'll figure it out. 99 outside right now. Tom Sullivan along with Doug Lipp, who is an expert on American-Japanese relations and a consultant, and is the president of G. Douglas Lipp and Associates here in Fair Oaks, local intercultural executive development. Before we get back to that subject, let me just tell you what's crossed the wires a minute ago. Senate Minority Leader Bob Dole saying He doesn't have all the details of the budget compromise yet, but he says what he calls a retroactive tax increase will take a big bite out of small business. He says the tax bill will be the most devastating to America's small business. The Republican leadership also says there's nothing in the package to create jobs. Now, there's another item here that passed the wires just a minute ago. Let's see, where? That's the same one there. We'll get it. There's all kinds of urgents coming across about the tax bill. And there is a message in here about, here it is. House Speaker Foley says the House will take action on the bill Thursday. And Senate Majority Leader Mitchell says the Senate will consider the compromise immediately after that. Mitchell expects Senate passage on Friday. So Thursday the House, Friday the Senate, tax bill going through. You like it, you hate it, get your word in before then to your elected representative. Let's go back to the phones. Don in Sacramento. Hello, Don. You're on KFBK with Doug Lipp.
Hello. What a pertinent program. I just saw the movie yesterday.
Oh, good.
And read the book the week before.
Well, good.
And a quick comment on that before my question. I thought they came down very heavy on the Japanese. All of them seemed quite evil in the film, with the exception of the Eddie. Eddie seemed like a nice guy, but the others not so. Anyway, my question, in a general sense, what are the weaknesses in the Japanese system of doing business, and what are the strengths of the American system?
That's a great question.
So I'll hang up and listen.
All right. Thanks, Don.
Thank you.
What do you think?
Well, I think the strength of the American system traditionally has been our creativity and our ability to think on our feet. And if you look at some of the decision-making problems that have occurred between Japanese and American joint ventures, this is where the rub or the friction often occurs, is we want to make a decision quickly and get on with things, and the Japanese want to analyze things a great deal. It can be good, but also if you look at what's happened in the Japanese economy the last 18 months, some of the plans that were laid 24 months ago or 36 months ago are set in concrete, and they're having a hard time steering off of that course. So once a plan is set in motion, it's very hard to turn either a corporate policy or a political policy around, whereas in the United States, we can move much more quickly.
And that's good for us, but not good for us when we are dealing with the Japanese. What do you think as far as how long does it take to establish a relationship?
That's the way that my Japanese...
What is the proper dating period, I guess?
That's a tough question to ask, Tom, and I think that's one of the most often asked questions of Americans who are going to go to Japan, is we want to be able to put it...
How quick?
How quick? Months, years. It takes time.
I mean, that must be you could just sense the American way. Okay,
Exactly.
How soon can we do this?
Exactly.
Can we get the paper signed tomorrow?
It drives us up the wall.
What if, 5 years?
Depends on the company, depends on your approach. But it could take as many as several years before you get into a good business relationship with a counterpart in Japan. Several years at least. Some companies have been there for a decade and they're still losing money.
Do you think that rice will ever be exported from here?
Tough question. Boy, I think that we've got a better chance now than we've had in the past with the changing political structure in Japan. But it's going to be something that will benefit them as well as it will benefit us. Somewhat similar to when they started buying ranches in Montana and exporting U.S. beef. Now it's okay to export the beef that it's going through Japanese hands, and I imagine the rice contingency will go the same way.
So much has changed in Japan. When I was over there in '89, they were prosperous. They were hell-bent for election. They had money galore, and they were very confident. In fact, I was even told by a banker in Japan, that senior banker of one of the largest banks in the world, that their economy was not susceptible to recession. So here we are. I wonder what he's thinking right now.
That's a good question. A lot of my good friends in large Japanese companies in Japan are lamenting the fact that instead of getting their midsummer bonuses in cash, they're getting a percentage of it in cash and a percentage of it in chits or coupons to purchase products from their own companies.
Oh, kind of a forced hand back to sales then.
Exactly.
All right. William in Placerville. Hello, William. You're on with Doug Lipp.
Oh, thank you very much.
You bet.
I read the book. I haven't seen the movie yet. My reaction after reading the book was, to make America the best in the world. And as far as minorities in California reacting to the movie, I would think if they would just say, okay, let's just make America the best industrial power, economic power in the world. I don't think Americans would have. I don't think there would be a problem with the book. I don't think it portrays Japanese firms any differently than American firms were portrayed when they were the power.
Gave you kind of the impetus to go out there and do it right then, huh?
with Americans?
Make America better.
Well, yeah, after reading the book, I didn't have any hatred towards the Japanese. I think if the Japanese cultural groups in this country would just say, you know, we're American citizens, we wish to make American companies the best, our loyalty is to American companies, no problem.
What about that, Doug? We have a lot that's changed over there, though. When Michael Crichton wrote this book was about the time that I was over there, and they were on top of the world. And since then, the Liberal Democratic Party, which you just referred to, has lost their control. They're still powerful, but lost their control. The bubble has burst. They're in a recession. Their banks, there's still some people who say the banks haven't seen the worst of it yet. Their stock market has come down in half. The United States has kind of snapped back. We've overtaken the semiconductor industry again, and some of the areas that we thought we had lost, we are now in charge of. Do you think the book could have been written today, or do you think it's something where the delay in writing, publishing, getting the movie out still is valid?
Well, I think when it was written, we had a lot more of the heat between the two countries than we do right now. The Japanese seemed to be invincible. Japan Inc. was at its zenith at that time, and we were also facing the recessionary problem in our own country. I think what the caller refers to is accurate in many cases. I mean, American companies for years had gone overseas, whether it's South America or Europe or the Middle East, and we got to do our own thing, and nobody really blew the whistle on us, so to speak. Unfortunately, the Japanese are in a position now where they are in this multimedia society where anything that goes wrong, whether it's a class action lawsuit against a large Japanese bank or a chemical spill, it instantly hits the airwaves, and they are reaping the negative benefits of some of the mistakes that they've made in the U.S. with their naivete.
You think some of that Japan bashing has gone away because of the fact that maybe some of the deals they've done have turned out where the Americans who sold the real estate, for example, to them kind of got the last laugh, if you will? Some of these properties are not worth what the Japanese paid for them.
Precisely, and that's also a source of concern to many of my Japanese friends, is that no one has held a gun to the heads of the American corporations or whoever owned these properties and told them you must sell this to the Japanese, but the Japanese are portrayed as these devils that come along and buy all these trophy properties.
It also has a lot to do with currency change and the fact that when it was so easy for them to pay what we consider to be top money, but in fact, when you did the translation, it was a bargain from their standpoint as well. But I don't think a lot of people took into account that. And then the reversal of that, with the dollar going down so low, their dollar doesn't buy very much, or their dollar buys a lot here. Their yen buys a lot here, but our dollar doesn't buy many of their products.
Right, I think a lot of the things that we're seeing now are the same things that we saw back in the 70s with the dollars flowing in from the Middle East, and it was kind of sour grapes on our part that someone was able to come in here at cents on the dollar and purchase things that we weren't able to.
Yeah. In fact, I've related to that before as the 70s were the decade of anti-Arab. The 80s were the decade of anti-Japanese, and I was trying to figure out, I thought it was going to be the 90s were going to be the anti-Germans. I'm not sure that's true because it's not working out exactly the way they wanted it to with the surprise of the wall coming down. But the Germans are the ones that are coming on strong.
That's
if
right.
It wasn't for the big expense they have, but they're not through. They just got another half a country for dirt cheap that they're going to remodel. It's 2:46. We're talking with Doug Lipp. He is the president of G. Douglas Lipp & Associates Intercultural Executive Development. They're headquartered in Fair Oaks. We'll come back and talk more about Rising Sun right after this on KFBK. Doug Lipp is here. He's the president of G. Douglas Lipp & Associates Intercultural Executive Development. You have a book that you have written. You've got another one that you're just about finished with. Can you tell us about them?
Well, the first book I co-authored with another gentleman. It's focusing on the problems that face U.S.-based Japanese corporations, and we've taken 10 issues and analyzed them both from the Japanese perspective and the American perspective, and then looked at ways that they can overcome some of those issues. That'll be published both here and in Japan. The other one that I'm in the middle of working on right now is an analysis of the Tokyo Disneyland project, and it's the 10th anniversary this year, and I'm looking at how the Japanese and the Americans that worked on that project were able to overcome some of these inherent cultural differences to turn out such a quality product known today as Tokyo Disneyland.
And you worked for Disney at the time.
That's correct.
So you have the inside knowledge of how that was put together.
I've been interviewing a lot of the folks that I worked with on that project.
As far as, again, going back to when Michael Crichton wrote the book Rising Sun, and things were different. They were on the apex, and we were sitting here with our chins down saying they're coming over here and they're taking over the country. And you're right, they didn't have any guns pointed at anybody's head. They just offered a tremendous amount of money, and everybody said, I'll never sell to them until they actually got an offer. But is now that things have changed, have they really changed? Or some critics say things haven't changed one bit. This is all temporary, and that when we get through with our slowdown in our economy here, and they get through with their slowdown over there, that things are going to come back, and the Japanese are going to be even more aggressive in their approach to buying U.S. assets, not letting people in to do business in Japan, so forth and so on. What do you think of those critics?
Well, I'm not sure about the issue of not buying more U.S. assets. What I'm absolutely sure of is that the Japanese during this economic downturn in Japan are retrenching and becoming even more finely tuned and more aggressive. So even within Japan, they are being asked to accomplish a number of things without the money that they had in the past. Likewise, internationally, they're going to be doing the same thing. They're going to be a force to be reckoned with, no question.
We are too. So I guess it's who comes out stronger after the slowdown.
We'll have to see when that battle occurs.
Yeah. Battle is a good choice of words, right?
Exactly. That's what it is.
Tom in Sacramento. Hello, Tom. You're on with Doug Lipp.
Hello.
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 Yes. I wonder if you could get your guest to comment on the political influence that was used for us to pay the Japanese $20,000 to each American Japanese that was incarcerated during World War II.
Did the Japanese government get involved in lobbying for that? Do you know?
I'm not aware. I wouldn't want to comment on that.
Okay. Randy in Elk Grove. Hello, Randy. You're on KFPK.
Hello. By the way, Tom, I like your show very much.
Thank you.
My question is that with our upcoming NAFTA agreement and our borders opening up to both Canada and Mexico, how do you think how will that affect Japanese companies in this country? And as far as your business goes, how will this affect your business?
Well, I think as far as Japanese companies, a lot of people are saying that they have difficulty working in the United States with regards to some of our employment law or regarding getting permits to build things. If it becomes too burdensome, then they will just forget about this market and go ahead and build like they're already doing in parts of Mexico so that they can easily transport the product across the border. As far as my business, it's going to help even more. The more globalized this world becomes, and it is becoming that way, and the more interface between people from dissimilar cultures, it's more of an opportunity for me to play my trade, so to speak.
And that's what you do. So you teach people how to get along with people across imaginary lines.
Exactly.
Jack in Sacramento. Hello, Jack. You're on with Doug Lipp.
Hello, I have two questions. First, the question is, what does Mr. Lipp think about Clyde Prestowitz's Trading Places, the book? And the second question is what he thinks about the role of the Komeito Party within the new Japanese ruling coalition that's emerging. I am concerned about Komeito because I did research on its parent organization, let's put it that way.
Okay.
The research that Prestowitz does is very good. He's got some definite opinions about how things have changed and how things are going to change, and I agree with a lot of the things that he talks about in his book, Trading Places. The issue with the Komeito Party in Japan, I'm not a political scientist, so I don't feel confident to answer with the regards to the question you asked there.
And we should make clear that Clyde Prestowitz was a former Reagan trade official who was involved with trade. We don't have time for another caller. In summary, trade issues with Japan, getting better, getting worse? Are we still just jawboning and they wave at us and say, we'll try harder, or what do you think?
I think in summary, both the Japanese and the Americans have to realize that there are some major differences we've got to work on. And for the American companies, there are plenty that have been successful in Japan, and I look at those as role models and not to rely on our respective governments to take care of us. It's possible to be effective across cultures without throwing insults at each other. Naturally, that will occur, but I've seen too many success stories, both of Japanese companies in the U.S., American companies in Japan, where they've respected the culture of the other group, and they've made tremendous inroads into a market share and had very, very profitable and healthy bottom lines.
Doug Lipp, president of I want to do that, G. Douglas Lipp and Associates. I appreciate very much you coming in. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.